Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're heading way back to the frosty fjords and smoke-sweet longhouses of Viking Scandinavia, where the air smells like pine wood, sweat, and slightly overcooked fish. You're not raiding, not yet. For now, you're just waking up in a pile of straw and wool, and to be clear, you probably wouldn't survive this. Sorry. The air is cold enough to turn your teeth into little ice goblins. The floor is just dirt with ambition, and the nearest bathroom is a hole near the goats. But hey, your heart's beating, the roof didn't cave in during the night, and your boots are only slightly frozen. That's a win. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're cozy, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious who else is wide awake at 1:47 AM. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift under your wool blanket and sit up slowly. The longhouse around you glows faintly with the light of embers still flickering in the hearth. A dog is snoring by the fire, probably named something adorable like Snorri, and you can hear the rhythmic scraping of someone already sharpening an axe. Outside, a rooster crows like he's been offended by the sun. You step carefully onto the packed earth floor and stretch, pulling on thick wool trousers and a tunic that's about 2 days past its ideal laundry window. The air smells like smoked fish, pine resin, and something pickled. Probably turnips. Today's not a raiding day, and thank Odin for that. Instead, it's a living day, quiet and grounded. You glance around at your family, still tucked in under fur cloaks, and quietly grab a bowl to scoop up the leftover porridge that's been congealing by the fire overnight. It's thick, chewy, and surprisingly satisfying once you get past the first cold spoonful. You settle onto a low bench and begin the important work of braiding your beard. Viking fashion isn't just about intimidation. It's about status, skill, and whether or not a bird could comfortably nest in your facial hair. You've got a single braid down the centre with 2 smaller ones on the sides. Practical, intimidating, slightly itchy. Outside, someone yells havregrut, which, as far as you can tell, means oatmeal, hurry up, or I just stubbed my toe. You take it as a sign that it's time to get moving. Today you'll be sailing out with the others to resupply at a small trade outpost down the coast. Not raiding, not exploring the open sea, just rowing, singing, bartering and trying not to drop anything valuable into the fjord. As you step outside, the crisp morning air hits you like a slap from a wet squirrel. You inhale deeply. Somewhere nearby, gulls shriek overhead, and someone is already shouting about needing more pitch for the boat hull. You walk down toward the longship, its dragon-headed prow rising like a sleeping myth above the misty shoreline. Men and women alike are loading bundles of goods, furs, dried fish, carved trinkets, and one inexplicably large cheese wheel, into the belly of the vessel. Someone hands you a heavy oar with a nod and you take your place among the rowers. The sea is calm today, which is lucky, because last week the wind nearly turned the ship sideways, and one guy swears he saw a mermaid insult his rowing form. As you push off, you settle into the rhythm of the row, pull, breathe, hum, pull. The sea songs begin, low and slow, keeping time better than any drum. Some are about gods, some are about goats, and some don't make much sense unless you're drunk on mead. But even out here, beneath open skies and the sharp cry of seabirds, you feel something simple, life moving forward. With each splash of the oar, each gust of salty wind, you realise that for all the roughness, for all the danger, you're part of something ancient and oddly joyful. You reach the little coastal outpost by late morning. It's nothing grand, just a few huts, a stone hearth, and a cluster of tents filled with traders from across the sea. There's a man from the east offering silk, another with jars of fermented fish you don't dare smell, and someone trying to sell what they claim is a magical comb. Your job is to barter, and bartering is half theatre. You puff up your chest, squint suspiciously at a bronze pendant, and grunt non-committally. After 5 minutes of silent staring and one exchanged dried apple, you successfully trade a carved antler comb for 2 skeins of dyed wool and a small polished amber bead. You feel rich, even richer when someone hands you a hunk of warm flatbread, fresh from the hearth. You sit with a few others near the boat, basking in the moment. The air smells of salt and firewood. Someone's playing a small wooden flute. A child chases a chicken that clearly doesn't want to be chased. And for a brief, golden stretch of time, you remember this. Viking life isn't just sailing into battle with a war cry and an axe. It's rowing beside your friends. It's eating warm bread by the sea. It's laughing over a good trade, and returning home with stories you'll definitely exaggerate later. But before the day's done, you're due for something even more glorious. A bath, not just any bath. A Viking bath, which, as it turns out, is both hotter and more social than you probably expected. After unloading your modest haul from the longship and tucking your little amber bead into your pouch like it's dragon treasure, you head down the worn footpath to the steam hut. It's nestled near the edge of the settlement, halfway between the longhouse and the goat paddock, which is either perfectly positioned or mildly unfortunate, depending on the wind. The hut itself is small, made from thick timber and turf, with smoke gently puffing from a hole in the roof. As you step inside, you're immediately swallowed by a wall of damp, pine-scented heat. The smell of birch branches, sweat, and smoky lye soap hits your nostrils like a memory you didn't know you had. People are already in there, some chatting in low voices, some just lounging with eyes half closed like very relaxed wolves. You strip down and take your place on a low bench near the fire-heated rocks. It's dim, warm, and deeply peaceful. One of the elders ladles water onto the stones. The hiss is immediate, followed by a thick wave of steam that curls into your beard and makes your scalp tingle. You grab a vasta, a bundle of leafy birch twigs, and give yourself a few good thwacks across the shoulders. It's supposed to be invigorating. Honestly, it kind of is, like exfoliating with a tree. This is more than hygiene, this is ritual. Vikings were surprisingly clean, especially compared to their later medieval neighbours. Weekly baths weren't just common, they were expected. You scrub yourself with a mix of ash, soap and sand, rinse off with cold water and sit back, letting the warmth work into your joints. Someone passes you a carved horn of weak ale. You sip. It's terrible, but that's not the point. The conversation drifts from local gossip. Did you see the fish that washed up on the beach? Looked like it had teeth. To mild philosophy. What if thunder isn't Thor but just the sky burping? You contribute very little and are praised for your wisdom. Eventually someone brings up the thing. No, not the mysterious creature in the woods. The legal assembly, known simply as the thing. It's happening tomorrow and you'll be going. Not because you have a case to argue, but because it's one of the most Viking things a Viking can do. Stand in a muddy field while loud people shout about property boundaries and insult each other using poetic metaphors. You towel off with rough linen, put your clothes back on, still slightly damp from earlier, and step back outside, skin warm and face flushed. The air feels cleaner now, brighter. Even the goats seem less judgy. You stroll back into the heart of the village where your cow is waiting. Yes, you have a cow. And this, in Viking society, makes you practically elite. Her name is Brynhilda. She's not graceful, she drools, but she hasn't run off or eaten your neighbour's turnips, and in this world that makes her priceless. Cows mean status. Livestock was wealth. Walking, mooing, occasionally farting wealth. If you had cows, goats, maybe even a few chickens who didn't constantly vanish into the woods, you were somebody. You could offer milk, cheese, and most importantly, bragging rights. Brunhilde blinks slowly at you, then sneezes in your direction. Affection, probably. You glance around and notice your neighbour's pen is empty. His cow is missing again. That's the 3rd time this month. There's a brief, unspoken moment where you both acknowledge it without speaking. Then he walks away, grumbling something about elves. You feed Brynhilde a scoop of hay, then head toward the fire pit behind the longhouse. It's the evening before the thing, and that means it's time for a little preparation. Food, stories, and very light scheming, and someone's already got a pot of barley stew bubbling over the fire. You take a seat on a log, wrap your cloak tighter, and take in the low buzz of the village around you. Children chase each other with sticks. A woman nearby is spinning wool. Someone starts tuning a lyre, poorly. You smile. This is home. The sky above is streaked with colour, deep blue fading into lavender, with the stars beginning to show through. You lean back, stomach full, hands warm and eyes heavy. Today was just a regular Viking day. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you go to the thing. You wake early the next morning with a sore back and a mild sense of dread. Because today is Thing Day, and that means standing in a crowd of passionate, loud Vikings arguing over fences, goats, and who insulted whose grandfather's beard. You stretch under your cloak, blink at the sky already glowing pale orange, and shuffle toward the hearth to warm your hands. A nearby neighbour greets you with a grunt and a nod. The Viking equivalent of, "Good morning, hope you slept decently, don't start any legal duels today." You scarf down some dried fish and a hunk of bread so hard it could double as a shield. Then you sling your cloak over your shoulder and make your way toward the assembly field, where the thing is already gathering. It's a big open space just past the edge of the village. People are arriving on foot, by cart and some by boat. Because yes, Viking democracy sometimes travels by fjord. There's a carved wooden platform for the law speaker, a few raised stones for the elders, and everyone else sort of just stands around waiting to yell. The thing wasn't just a meeting, it was the central Viking legal system. Disputes were brought here, decisions made, and punishments handed down. Everyone participated. It was noisy, it was messy, and yes, it was democratic, though you wouldn't want to raise your hand during a particularly heated pig theft case. You find a good patch of dirt, cross your arms, and settle in. The first case? Land boundaries. Two brothers are arguing over a strip of land between their homes, currently occupied by 3 confused goats and 1 disinterested dog. One brother says the dog always sleeps on his side of the stream, and therefore the goats are his. The other brother says the stream has moved, which makes the dog a traitor. The crowd is riveted. You watch the law speaker step forward. He's older, with a booming voice and a beard like a small thundercloud. He speaks from memory. There's no written law code here, only tradition and interpretation. His job is to recite past rulings, interpret legal customs, and occasionally bang a staff on the ground when things get too spicy. He delivers a ruling. The goats stay where they are, but the brothers must host a feast together and stop letting livestock dictate their relationships. Everyone nods like this makes perfect sense. You suppose it does. The next case is a little more dramatic. A man accuses another of slander, claiming he insulted his wife's weaving, which in Viking society is basically like calling someone's mother a wet cabbage. The insulted party demands compensation in the form of wool, honey, and public acknowledgement of his wife's superior warp-weighted loom skills. There's yelling, there's poetic insult swapping. There's even a moment where someone challenges someone else to holmgang, a formal duel, usually on a cloak or small island. Thankfully, cooler heads prevail, and the duel is avoided by promising to send a truth chicken to peck at both parties. Historians still argue whether that was a real custom or just a very sarcastic local solution. You step aside for a moment, taking a break from the crowd, and notice something odd. Despite the drama, the accusations, the insults, you realise the system kind of works. People show up, they speak, they're heard, there's laughter, frustration, compromise. It's not perfect, but it's not tyranny either. And in a world where might usually makes right, that's kinda awesome. You grab a cup of warm ale from a woman walking through the crowd and ask her what happens when someone really messes up. She tells you, matter-of-factly, that in serious cases, like murder or outlawry, the punishment is banishment. Not death, not prison, just permanent exile. You become a skoga marder, a man of the woods, no protection, no home, no rights. You sip your ale thoughtfully. Viking justice isn't soft, but it's clear. If nothing else, the thing teaches you that your words carry weight, your actions echo, and your neighbour may quote an insult you forgot you said 2 summers ago. The sun's high by the time the assembly wraps. Disputes have been settled. Fines levied. One man declared legally responsible for 3 sheep and a broken cartwheel. You're exhausted from standing, hungry from skipping second breakfast, and quietly proud that you managed not to yell at anyone. As the crowd disperses, you head back toward the village with a few others. The path winds between fields now golden with early grain. You hear someone singing a saga softly to themselves. Something about a woman who out-argued a king using only puns and a fish. You walk with the group in silence for a while, reflecting on the day. The thing wasn't flashy, it wasn't carved into stone, but it was yours. A Viking institution, a communal breath, a shared, slightly chaotic heartbeat. When you reach the longhouse, you're greeted with something even better than justice. Hot stew. Someone's already ladling it into bowls, and you accept one gratefully, sitting near the hearth with your boots off and your legs stretched out. A few embers pop softly. The broth is thick and peppery, with big chunks of root vegetable and salt pork. You're not sure what kind of pork, and you don't ask. After a few minutes, someone pulls out a lyre, badly tuned, beautiful anyway. And slowly, the conversation shifts from land disputes to stories, the kind that stretch the truth a little, or a lot, because now it's story time. You shift on the bench, pulling your cloak tighter. Outside, the sky has faded into the deepest blue, stars prickling above the treetops. Inside, the air hums with the low rhythm of voices. One man clears his throat and launches into a tale about a warrior named Eagle who, according to the storyteller, once headbutted a berserker so hard it broke 2 helmets, and then wrote a poem about it. This is how Viking sagas were passed down, orally, dramatically, with the kind of flair usually reserved for stage plays and tavern lies. And yet somehow they stuck. The rhythm of the speech, the repetition of key lines, the dramatic pauses before someone's face gets smashed in, is all part of the magic. You settle in, eyes half closed, listening as the story winds on. There are gods and giants, of course, a troll wife who challenges Thor to a drinking contest, a warrior who gets stuck in a fish's stomach for 3 days, and a farmer who accidentally becomes a king after winning a spitting contest. Historians still argue whether that last one ever actually happened. Occasionally someone interrupts with a correction. No, the troll bit his shield, not his leg. Then someone else offers a regional version. Then the argument dissolves into laughter. It's not about accuracy. It's about the moment. You're handed a small carved token passed around the fire. It's shaped like a tiny hammer. Thor's, of course. Tradition says whoever holds it gets to tell the next part of the story. You panic slightly and say the first thing that comes to mind. One time I saw a goose steal a knife. It's not a saga, but everyone laughs, and somehow it becomes part of the evening's lore. The stories carry on late into the night. Eventually the topic shifts, naturally, awkwardly, to marriage. You're not married, not yet. But you've seen the ceremonies, and they are nothing if not dramatic. Viking weddings involved swords, feasting, oaths, and sometimes goats. You once saw a bride gift her groom a sword that had belonged to her grandfather and then make him step over it as part of the ceremony. The sword, not the grandfather. Women in Viking society weren't just passive figures waiting for someone to arrive home from a raid. They could own property, initiate divorce, and even settle disputes in court. Marriages were practical arrangements, often political or economic, but that didn't mean they lacked feeling. And when the rituals happened, they were vivid, sharing mead from the same cup, exchanging rings, or in some cases, blades. You once attended a wedding where the bride wore a red wool gown pinned with silver brooches shaped like wolves, and the groom arrived late because his ceremonial axe went missing. It was under a chicken. Long story. After the feast came the dancing. After the dancing came the singing. After the singing, someone tried to juggle fish and knocked over the mead barrel. Not every wedding was that chaotic, but they were always alive and deeply rooted in community. It wasn't just two people joining. It was two families, two farms, two herds of grumpy goats now expected to share space without incident. You finish the last of your drink and stretch. Someone's dozing by the fire. A few others are still murmuring saga fragments. You step outside to cool off, the cold air biting pleasantly at your cheeks. The sky is impossibly clear. You can see the Milky Way stretching like a frost-silvered bridge overhead. Somewhere in that sky the gods are said to travel. Thor, hammer in hand, Freya in her chariot. Odin with his ravens whispering secrets. You think about the stories you heard tonight. The laughter, the sword over the threshold, the goose with the knife. And you realise again that Viking life wasn't just about raiding. It was about sitting around fires, retelling sagas, and laughing hard enough to wake the livestock. You walk back inside as the fire crackles down to its last embers. A blanket is waiting. You wrap yourself in it and rest your head against a bundle of straw. Someone is still humming. The smell of stew lingers in the air. You close your eyes, not to the sound of swords, but to the sound of stories. You wake slowly, cocooned in the warmth of your wool blanket, the embers in the hearth now cold and grey. The longhouse is quiet, save for the low snore of someone still sleeping, and the occasional creak of wood as the building stretches under the morning chill. You sit up, stretch, and breathe in the scent of ash, smoke, and, yes, yesterday's stew. Somehow it's still hanging in the air like a loyal ghost. You step outside into the crisp morning air. The village is already humming with movement. Someone is feeding chickens, a child is dragging a bucket that's far too big for them, and someone else is hanging clothes that have no business being that colourful for the 10th century. The wind bites, but your cloak holds it back. You look down at your boots and wonder how long until one of them betrays you and springs a leak. After a few bites of leftover barley bread, you notice something gleaming near the door of the longhouse. Your brooch. It's a small thing, bronze, with an etched knot design that might be a wolf or might be someone sneezing. You pin it at your shoulder and instantly feel more official, because today you're wearing your best Viking clothes, and honestly they kind of slap. Contrary to the muddy, fur-covered stereotypes, Vikings took pride in their appearance. Your wool tunic is dyed with woad, giving it a soft blue hue. It's layered over linen underclothes that you desperately hope got washed last moon. Your trousers are tucked into leg wraps. Woolen bands spiral tightly from ankle to knee, not just for warmth, but for swagger. You fasten your belt, not because it holds anything up, nothing fits tightly anyway, but because it's got a shiny buckle. The buckle matters. Your boots are leather, stiff but loyal, and your cloak is pinned at one shoulder with that brooch you're definitely not obsessing over. It's slightly crooked. You adjust it 3 times. Perfect. You catch your reflection in a puddle and think, yes, Viking but fashionable. Around your waist you hang your seax, a short, broad knife that every self-respecting Viking carries, not just for battle but for cutting rope, chopping onions or threatening someone gently during a disagreement about fishing rights. You also hang a pouch of odds and ends, your amber bead, a carved bone comb, a tiny wooden figure of Thor with suspiciously short arms. You head toward the centre of the village where people are gathering for the day's work, and more importantly for a midday feast. It's not a celebration exactly, more of a we survived another week, let's eat something roasted kind of thing. Someone is turning a leg of lamb over an open flame. Someone else is slicing flatbread with a knife the size of a small sword. A few children are playing nearby with a ball of bundled rags, occasionally kicking it into the fire pit. This is considered entertainment. You find a spot on a log and sit down next to a woman stirring a pot of something thick, bubbling, and slightly suspicious. You ask what it is. She shrugs and says, "Root stuff." You nod respectfully. The food is hearty. Meat, root vegetables, bread with grains still crunchy enough to file teeth, and a fermented fish dish that everyone politely ignores. You eat with your fingers and your seax, which feels weirdly cool. The mead is passed around, honey wine that tastes like apples, flowers, and maybe mild regret. You sip and try not to wince. After a few rounds of food and mead, the lyre comes out. Someone attempts a song. They forget half the words, make up new ones, and are loudly corrected by 3 people who also don't remember the lyrics. You clap anyway. Then comes the poetry. Vikings weren't just about bashing skulls and hoarding silver. They loved poetry, especially skaldic verse. Complicated meters, internal rhymes, metaphors so dense you could trip over them in the snow. One man stands up and recites a verse about a fish who betrayed his friend, which might be a metaphor for a neighbour who didn't return a borrowed axe. Hard to say. You try to contribute a poem but give up halfway through and say something about clouds looking like goats. Everyone agrees. Very insightful. Between verses you chat with the others about travels, places you've never seen but know by name. Miklagard, the great city of Constantinople. Vinland, across the sea. Even Iceland, where some of your neighbours have kin. It hits you slowly that being a Viking didn't mean staying put. This was a world of movement, of wanderers, of people who just left. And you could too. No paperwork, no long goodbye. Just pack your gear, kiss your cow goodbye, and go find a new coastline to confuse with your presence. Some people did it for adventure, some for trade, some because someone at the thing said something rude and they didn't want to deal with it anymore. You sip your drink and stare into the fire, wondering where you'd go. Maybe south, where the winters are gentler, or west to see if those stories about land across the sea are true. Someone nudges you and says the bread is burning. You save it. Barely. As the sun begins to dip low, people start gathering up their things. The children have moved on to a game that involves throwing bones at a stump. Someone has already fallen asleep in the grass. The leftover stew is being repurposed into tomorrow's breakfast. You stand up, brushing crumbs off your tunic, and walk slowly back toward the longhouse, your cloak billowing just enough to feel impressive. Your belly is full, your knife is clean, your clothes are fire, and tomorrow you might leave. The idea lingers with you through the night, leaving. Not out of desperation, but out of curiosity. Vikings didn't just raid and return, many of them settled, traded, explored. They founded towns, carved out paths across rivers, and sometimes just showed up somewhere new and made it home. You fall asleep with your hands behind your head, staring at the roof beams, imagining what it might feel like to step onto a shore you've never seen before. By morning, your mind's made up. You're not sailing to the edge of the known world or anything yet, but you are joining the next crew headed toward a larger settlement up the coast. It's part trading post, part family reunion, part rumour mill. More importantly, it's a good place to hear where people are heading next. You pack light, a bundle of clothes, some dried meat and bread, your ever-loyal Sayax, and a small leather pouch of trinkets to barter with. You say goodbye to your cow, Brynhilda, who acknowledges you by chewing in your general direction. A neighbour agrees to watch her while you're away. You think she'll be fine. She's smarter than most people anyway. Down at the water, the longship is already being loaded. You greet the others, a few traders, a weaver looking to sell her cloth, 2 brothers who speak only in grunts, and one man who claims he once met a bear who could play the lyre. No one believes him, but everyone wants to hear more. The sails are lowered, the oars taken up, and soon you're gliding along the coast. The sky is clear, the wind just enough to push you along without knocking anyone overboard. You pass narrow cliffs, rocky beaches, and the occasional seal that stares at you like it knows something you don't. The sea air clears your head. It smells like salt, pine, and a little like wet wool, which might just be you. You watch as the coastline shifts. Villages give way to forests, then to wide bays with boats moored at every angle. The settlement ahead is bigger than your own, with stone paths, tall fences, and people bustling through the markets like ants with excellent posture. You dock and step off the boat, greeted by the chaotic hum of Viking commerce. Traders shout over one another, children run between carts. A man is trying to sell what he claims is dragon bone, but is clearly just painted driftwood. Still points for presentation. You make your way through the stalls. The goods are incredible. Furs from the north, glass beads from the south, spices you've never smelled before, and textiles so finely woven they look like water. You trade a carved antler pendant for a small pouch of saffron. You have no idea how to use it, but it smells like something rich people sneeze into. Here in this buzzing little hub of Viking ambition, you start to get it. Being a Viking wasn't just about sailing into battle with an axe and a scream. It was about access to the wider world, to stories, to trade, to options. They connected places that didn't even know each other existed. They learned languages, copied tools, swapped farming techniques, and probably also got lost a lot more than they admitted. You stop by a tavern, really more of a bench next to a cookpot, and sit with a few others. One man tells you he just returned from Ireland, where the people are short, clever, and too fast for clean sword work. Another says he's heading to the Russlands, a long, frozen journey inland, where they trade furs and silver, and occasionally get chased by bears the size of wagons. Again, possibly exaggerated. Historians still argue whether Viking expansion was driven by necessity, opportunity, or sheer boredom with fjords. Probably a little of everything. You're starting to think the most Viking thing of all wasn't raiding, it was wandering on purpose. You sleep that night in a shared lodge, packed between snoring traders and one man who dreams loudly about herring. It's uncomfortable, smelly, and somehow still comforting. You're part of something, a network, a people in motion. The next morning you follow a merchant to the docks. He's pointing at different ships, telling you where they're bound. One to Frisia, another to Iceland, another to Constantinople by way of rivers and bribery. You realise you could go anywhere. But for now, you return home. The boat ride back is quieter. You watch the coastline reappear, familiar and strange at the same time. Brynhilda is waiting. So's your longhouse, so are your stories. Because now you've seen more, and that changes things. You helped barter with foreign traders. You swapped fish for saffron. You learnt that the world is bigger than your fjord, and that leaving doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're learning. You step onto shore, stretch your legs, and smile at a group of children who run past you waving sticks and pretending they're swords. One yells, "I'm going to Miklagard!" and then trips over a rock. You help him up and think, you might. You head home with the sea still clinging to your skin, already planning your next journey. The journey home hasn't worn you down. It's done the opposite. You feel lighter, like your boots are made of wool and possibility. The village smells like pine smoke and peat again, and even the goats seem to bleat with a little less menace. You drop your bundle in the doorway of your longhouse and glance toward the paddock. Brynhilda lifts her head from a pile of hay, gives you a look that says, "I survived without you," and promptly returns to chewing. But before you can bask in your glorious return or recount tales of painted driftwood and riverbound empires, someone tugs at your cloak. It's Runa. She nods toward the centre of the village. "It's time," she says. You squint. "For what?" "For the women to remind everyone how things actually work." You follow her toward the gathering circle, where a dozen or more women are already waiting. They're not holding weapons. They're holding ledgers, baskets, tools, and the full weight of local knowledge. The thing may be where laws are spoken, but this is where reality is managed. Today is market tally day. That means counting what was traded, what was harvested, and who still owes half a goat from 3 moons ago. And yes, Viking women did this. They managed households, ran farms, oversaw trade, and frequently acted as the brains while the men were out rowing somewhere with too much confidence and not enough clean socks. Runa's already scolding one man who tried to fudge his barley report. You sit down and try to look helpful, even though your only contribution so far has been writing your name on the wrong side of a ledger stone. You quietly erase it with your thumb. Across the square you spot Gudrun, the weaver. She's got a new bolt of cloth so finely spun it could double as cloud. She sees you looking, raises an eyebrow and says, "It's not for sale, yet." You nod, suddenly aware that her negotiation tactics are sharper than your seax. As the sun climbs, the pace quickens. People come forward to settle debts, arrange marriages, and argue over chicken footprints. One woman mediates a dispute over whose sheep stole whose vegetable patch by assigning them each a corner of the pasture and offering to mark the boundaries with coloured wool. You are in awe. You realise quickly the women aren't just running things, they're steering the ship while everyone else rows. There's Solveig, who's overseeing the salt trade and intimidating two men with just her silence. There's Ulva, who's preparing a case to bring to the next thing, complete with witnesses and a sealed packet of preserved herring. There's evidence or snack, you're not sure. There's Freydis, who knows exactly how many sacks of dried fish each household owes and can recite that information while breastfeeding a baby and skinning a turnip. You sit back, watching it all unfold like a symphony of wool, logic, and occasional passive-aggressive eyebrow raises. And the best part, they're funny, sharp-witted, not cruel, just practised. One man tries to protest the quality of his turnip crop. He's met with a chorus of unimpressed glances. Runa leans over to you and whispers, "He planted them upside down." Historians still argue whether Viking society was truly egalitarian or simply made room for competent women out of sheer necessity. What's clear, though, is that Viking women had rights to divorce, to inherit, to own land, and to call you out if your sheep got into their onions. You help sort some inventory near the market shelter and end up in a brief but heartfelt debate about how many smoked eels equal a pound of butter. The answer apparently depends on the weather and how annoying the eel seller is that day. After lunch, stew again, now with more identifiable vegetables. The crowd begins to thin. The baskets are tallied, the debts settled, the wool stacked into neat, intimidating piles. You watch the women walk off in different directions, each returning to their farm, forge or loom, the day's business complete. The village still running. Back at the longhouse, you sit by the hearth with a cup of warm mead, staring into the fire. You think of the stories you heard last week, heroes, kings, berserkers, and how loudly they echo through the sagas. But here, today, there were no swords, no dragon ships, no distant horizons, just a village humming with order and laughter, and a group of women who keep the world from falling apart. You sip your mead and wonder, if someday a saga is told about you, will it be about a sword? Or about how you once got told off by a goat herder named Astrid who knew more about regional trade routes than your entire crew? Either way, you'll take it. The next morning arrives with the soft clatter of rain on thatched roofs and the distant bleating of a goat who clearly objects to damp grass. You wake slowly, stretched out under your wool cloak, a little sore from the previous day's ledger lifting, which, as it turns out, works entirely new muscles. Outside, the village is quieter. The rain has that calming, silencing effect, muting everything except for the occasional splash of boots through puddles. You eat a cold slab of cheese and some leftover barley bread, then pull on your cloak and step into the grey morning, unsure what the day has planned for you. Turns out the plan is to sit with the old men by the river. There's a rock near the bank, flat and wide, where a few retired warriors gather each week to talk, fish, complain, and tell the same stories again, but with more detail. Today you're invited. No formal ceremony. One of them just looks at you, gestures vaguely at the sky, and says, "Good day for remembering." You bring your own stool. The rain softens as the morning stretches on. One man carves a spoon, another tosses pebbles into the river. A third sharpens a blade that clearly hasn't seen action since Odin had two eyes. It's peaceful, the kind of peace you only get after decades of not dying in battle, which frankly is an achievement worth bragging about. They talk about the old raids, of course, places far away, names half lost to time, but they also talk about fishing techniques, old romances, who built the worst roof in the village, and that one time the chief forgot his own son's name during a wedding speech. You laugh, they do too, but eventually the conversation circles around to something deeper. Memory, storytelling, legacy. One of the men, his name is Bjorn, and his beard is long enough to need its own seat, leans in and tells you this. A good Viking dies with a sword in his hand. A wise Viking dies with his stories told. You nod, Not sure what to say, so you just ask for another pebble to toss. He hands you one, and it skips exactly twice before plopping into the current. The others are already moving on, talking about the importance of scars. One man pulls back his sleeve to reveal a jagged white line that looks like a lightning bolt. Says it came from a spear in Gotland. Another reveals a burn from when he dropped stew on his leg. He insists it hurt worse. The group agrees. You notice that none of them speak like warriors anymore. Not really. They talk like people who've lived, who've lost, who remember more than they can explain. Historians still argue whether Vikings really retired, or if they just stopped fighting until they died of something less glamorous, like roof rot or bad fish. But what's clear is that age was respected. Age warriors, age farmers, age weavers, they held stories, and that made them powerful. Back at the longhouse later that day, you sit by the hearth and think about your own stories. What would you tell? The time you bartered a goat for a scarf, the journey to the market town, the saga of the missing spoon? It all matters. Maybe not to everyone, but to someone. You decide to carve a small symbol into the lintel above the door. Nothing fancy, just a knotwork spiral you remember from a story about a woman who out-argued a god. It's your mark, a reminder that you were here, that you saw things, and that one day someone else might ask you how it used to be. The rain starts again. You brew some weak ale with dried herbs and pass the time plucking at a lyre with exactly one working string. It sounds terrible, but no one's here to complain, so you call it a win. Later, a child comes by asking if you know how to fish. You say, yes, you absolutely do not. But you figure if you hold the rod and look serious, the illusion will hold for at least an hour. You walk down to the same riverbank, where the water runs slow and brown under the low clouds. The child asks 100 questions. You answer most of them with confident shrugs and vague references to the old ways. It works. At one point the kid asks if you ever saw a sea monster. You say no. Then you pause. Then you say maybe. Because what's the point of getting older if you can't start adding a little mystery? The line tugs, and the child gasps as you pull up something long, slimy, and mildly aggressive. It's a fish. Barely. But it's a start. You walk back through the village with your catch dangling from a stick, the child skipping ahead and shouting that they caught it entirely by themselves. You don't argue. Dinner that night is fish stew. Again. But this time it's your fish, and that makes it special. You sit by the fire, belly full, fingers warm, and think, this wasn't a day of glory, but it was a good day. And in Viking life, that's more than enough. You wake to the sound of cheerful yelling. Not alarmed yelling, thankfully. Just the kind that happens when someone drops an entire stack of firewood and insists it was intentional. The sun is high already, slipping through the cracks of the longhouse walls in golden stripes. The air smells like morning bread and slightly singed wool. You sit up, stretch, and rub a thumb over the little spiral knot you carved yesterday. Still there, still yours. Outside, the village is alive. The energy's different today, light buzzing, expectant. Someone's strumming a lyre with more enthusiasm than skill, and you hear chatter about a feast later tonight. Not just dinner, a full, proper Viking celebration. You can already smell something roasting over a fire, and the thought of second stew in a row is mercifully replaced with dreams of crisp meat and fresh honey cakes. But first, there's work to be done. You join a group heading toward the outer fields, where you'll help with some harvesting. It's not glamorous, but it's honest and surprisingly social. You find yourself beside a woman named Astrid, who's simultaneously scything barley, balancing a baby on her hip, and explaining to a wide-eyed teenager how to spot the difference between edible mushrooms and ones that will make you dance with the sky elves. You silently take notes. The fieldwork is rhythmic, meditative. You feel your shoulders warm in the sun, the steady tug of grain in your hands, and the light ache of labour that for once doesn't involve axes or insults. You swap stories with the others. Someone talks about a raven that keeps stealing shiny objects. Someone else claims they saw Thor in the clouds during last week's storm. Someone swears they saw their cow smile, No one questions it. Viking life, you're realizing, was filled with small victories. You pause midday for bread and a shared jug of weak ale. A boy offers you a slice of dried apple which you accept like it's gold. You bite into it and stare up at the sky, a few drifting clouds overhead. You could get used to this. Back in the village, you help set up for the feast. Tables are brought out, wooden planks are resting on barrels or stumps. Baskets of bread, bowls of dried berries, grilled fish, and a single glorious spit-roasted boar that smells like joy itself. The mead is flowing early, and someone has brought a goat with flowers braided into its fur. It's unclear whether the goat is part of the meal or a guest of honour. No one seems willing to ask. As the feast begins, you take a seat beside a trader from another village. He tells you tales of far-off places, blue glass islands, mountains that steam, birds the size of boats. You know at least half of it is nonsense, but you nod along anyway. Every good story starts with a lie and ends in a legend. The food is incredible. Roasted meat, soft bread, honey butter, something that might be turnip and might be art. You eat until your belt protests and then eat a little more, because Viking feasts are about abundance. The proof that your people can provide, can survive, and can come together without needing a single excuse beyond "we're still here." And the music? Terrible, in the best way. A young man plays a bone flute slightly out of tune. Two women harmonise on a song about a fox who married a bear. Someone with a drum makes up rhythms that don't match anything but feel exactly right. You find yourself tapping along. Eventually, someone stands and begins to recite. A new saga, this time about a traveller who braved high seas, clever women, feasts and goat-related misunderstandings, and somehow lived to tell the tale. Halfway through, you realise the story sounds suspiciously like you. They changed your name, but not enough. You sit quietly, face warm with mead and a little pride, as people laugh and cheer at the retelling of your extremely heroic barter for a slightly dented iron kettle. And then the dancing starts. It's clumsy, joyful. Several people have clearly already lost track of their own feet. You're dragged into it before you can protest and find yourself in a spinning circle of laughter, arms and cloaks flapping like sails. You nearly trip over a chicken. The goat is definitely participating. You don't know how late it gets. At some point you're seated by the fire again, cheeks flushed, hands sticky with honey cake. A child falls asleep beside you. Someone is snoring against a barrel. The stars above look closer than they should, like they've leaned in to listen. And you think, in this still flickering moment, that this is why it was kind of awesome being a Viking. Not the raids, not the ships, not even the cow, but this. Community, celebration, the quiet pride of building something that lasts longer than a single lifetime. You close your eyes and let the night settle over you like a warm, smoky cloak, still smiling from a story that somehow made you the hero. You wake up in the grass, cloak tangled around your legs, mouth slightly open, and with exactly 3 pine needles stuck to your cheek. A nearby rooster crows late as usual, and somewhere in the village a dog is barking at something invisible and possibly existential. You sit up slowly, blinking against the early morning light, and take a moment to remember why your calves are sore. Oh right, dancing, the goat, the part where you might have tried to spin someone twice your size. Worth it. The village is quiet in the soft hush that follows a feast. People move slower today, voices hushed, smiles tired but satisfied. You make your way to the hearth, find a leftover honey cake, and chew thoughtfully while staring at the fading footprints around the fire pit. You've had a lot of good days lately, but this one might be clothing day. You head back inside, unwrap a small bundle from your pack and lay it out. A few lengths of wool, 2 polished bronze brooches, and a belt buckle shaped like a bear's face. Today you're finally finishing your Viking outfit. Not for battle, not for ceremony, just because you can, and it's going to look awesome. You start with your tunic, a thick wool weave dyed with madder root, a kind of soft rust red that somehow still smells faintly of the sheep it came from. You pull on your leg wraps, winding the wool tightly around your shins like you're preparing for a particularly fashionable snowstorm. Your cloak is pinned at the shoulder with a disc brooch, a little tarnished, but the spiral design still shines if you squint. You step outside feeling like a wool-clad legend. Clothing wasn't just protection from the cold, it was identity, status. Vikings didn't wear armour around the village. They wore what showed who they were, and you, with your modest embroidery and slightly too proud posture, looked like someone who could convincingly negotiate over boat nails and walk away richer. You pass Runa, who gives you a once-over and says, "Trying to impress the cows again?" You pretend not to hear her over the sound of your own swagger. You head toward the marketplace, where a few traders are packing up their wares, and a young man is struggling to explain why he dyed all the wool blue on purpose. You offer to help, mostly because you want people to see your outfit. While stacking bundles, a woman asks where you got your brooch. You shrug and say something mysterious about a long story and a short piece of silver. Later, while resting near the forge, you find yourself talking to an old smith. He compliments your cloak. You compliment his beard. A silent agreement is formed. Mutual admiration, 0 questions. He shows you how bronze brooches were cast. Molten metal poured into carved soapstone moulds, cooled, polished, then worn with casual pride. He even lets you try. You grip the ladle, pour the gleaming metal, and hold your breath as it hisses and cools into shape. When it's done, he hands it to you. A little crooked, definitely too thick, but undeniably yours. You thank him and pin it beside your first one. Double brooch day. You feel unstoppable. As the afternoon stretches on, you help sew a small tear in your sleeve. You're no expert, but someone nearby is, and they guide your clumsy stitches with patient laughter. You learn that some Viking women embroidered runes and charms into hems, little protective blessings, stitched quietly into everyday life. You consider adding one, not for protection, but for good luck in not spilling stew on your tunic again. You take a walk through the village, watching others at work. Someone spinning wool, someone tanning hides, someone trying to catch a chicken with the speed and grace of a collapsing ladder. The clothes they wear vary. Earth tones, fur trim, layers upon layers against the coming cold. Everyone looks like themselves, like Vikings. Not the horned helmet kind, but the human kind. Historians still argue whether Viking clothing was more functional or decorative. Truth is, it was both. You needed to stay warm, sure, but also you needed to look good doing it, especially if you wanted people to trust your bartering skills or marry off a cousin. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the fields, you find yourself back at the riverbank, your reflection in the still water framed by your cloak, and both brooches glinting in the golden light. You look respectable, not heroic, not intimidating, just you, a little dusty, slightly sunburned, probably carrying crumbs from that second honey cake. But you nonetheless. You sit down and let your feet dangle into the cool water. Ripples spread outward, catching the last of the day's light. It's easy to forget sometimes that the things we wear aren't just decoration. They're signals, stories, tiny stitched banners saying, "I belong here, I've lived here, I've been here." You lie back in the grass and close your eyes, your new brooch heavy against your chest, your wool cloak wrapped around you like a soft, smoky shield. And for the first time in a while, you don't feel like you're playing Viking. You just feel like one. The sun rises late the next morning, filtered through a thin veil of clouds, casting a sleepy grey over the village. You stretch under your cloak and sit up slowly, the memory of your double brooch triumph still making you smile. But today isn't about looking good, today it's about food. Not just eating it, though let's be honest, that's the best part, but gathering it, preparing it, storing it, and making sure there's enough to get through winter without ending up in a saga titled "That Time Everyone Got Real Thin Real Fast." You start the day by checking the root cellar, which is more of a cool hole in the ground than anything fancy. Inside, there are baskets of turnips, onions, dried mushrooms, and what you sincerely hope is cheese. You take inventory, which mostly means counting by sniffing. One turnip smells suspicious. You mark it mentally as probably cursed. Outside, you're roped into helping with the preserving of fish, a truly Viking activity that involves salt, smoke, and a tolerance for strong smells. A long rack of drying fish flaps gently in the wind like salty streamers of survival. You hang up your share, trying to look like you know what you're doing. A boy nearby gags dramatically, you gag quietly. It's tradition. Then it's off to the smokehouse where slabs of meat are slowly turning into future stew ingredients. The inside is dim, full of smoke and the smell of wood and fat. You help stoke the fire and adjust the meat hooks, resisting the urge to snack. The woman in charge eyes you with the intensity of someone who knows exactly how many pieces were hung up and how many are missing. You do not test her. Around midday, you join a group walking out to gather herbs and late-season greens. You didn't realise Viking meals required so much plant-based effort. Turns out they didn't live off meat alone. Wild leeks, nettles, sorrel, and even seaweed find their way into soups and stews. You learn which leaves to avoid, the ones that make your tongue feel like it's been stung by bees, and which to collect by the handful. A woman named Solveig explains that each family stores food differently, some with pits filled with ash, others with layers of moss or fermented whey. She once stored cheese in a hollow log. You're not sure if that's genius or just determined. You head back with your bundle, hands smelling of herbs and peat, and past the baker's fire pit, where someone is flattening dough and pressing it onto hot stones. The bread comes out uneven, smoky, and perfect. You're handed one without ceremony. It's hot, it burns your fingers, you eat it anyway. In the afternoon it's time to brew. Not the fancy stuff, just a small batch of weak ale made with barley, water, and whatever herbs someone didn't need for stew. You stir the mash with a carved paddle and listen to the bubbles rise like a pot whispering secrets. Brewing, someone explains, isn't just a pastime, it's a necessity. Water can be risky, ale is safer, also tastier. You sip the last batch from a horn cup. It's sour, earthy, and just alcoholic enough to make chores feel like songs. And speaking of songs, someone down near the riverbank has started one. A low tune about harvest moons and spilled mead, sung in a rhythm that matches the stirring of porridge. You hum along without meaning to. It's not beautiful, but it's honest, like the food you've spent all day helping prepare. No sugar, no decoration, just warmth, salt, smoke, and a little burned bread. Historians still argue whether Viking food was bland or brilliant. Truth is, it was both, depending on the season, the cook, and whether your goat had recently kicked over your spice jar. But the meals weren't just sustenance. They were gathering points, routines, and quiet daily victories. You help carry baskets of goods into the longhouse, stacking turnips, smoked fish, and jars of pickled cabbage like offerings to the future. Every item has meaning. Every bundle is a reason to breathe easier. That night, the evening meal is simple but deeply satisfying. Fish stew, flatbread, and a sweet cake made with dried berries and too much effort. You sit near the fire, tired and full, your hands still stained from herbs and soot. Someone asks what you did today. You shrug. Saved us from starving this winter, you say. No one laughs, because it's true. You lean back against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the gentle murmur of your village at rest, the crackle of firewood, the soft clink of pottery, the occasional snore from someone who clearly had an extra mug of ale. And you think being a Viking wasn't always glorious. It wasn't always heroic or loud. Sometimes it was just putting things in jars or hanging fish to dry, brewing a drink strong enough to forget that winter is always coming. But that, in its own way, was awesome, because it meant you were still here, still eating, still singing, still ready. The days grow shorter now. The sun lingers low in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the frostbitten ground. When you step outside in the morning, your breath comes out in pale clouds, and the chickens are slower to leave their coop, as if they too are reconsidering their life choices. You pull your cloak tighter and walk the familiar path toward the firewood pile. It's time to stock up again. Winter doesn't care how cozy the last feast was. It's coming anyway, with cold fingers and a smug expression. You start chopping wood, rhythmically, axe, thud, split. It's meditative, satisfying, also exhausting. After you've worked up a good sweat and a slightly bruised thumb, you hear footsteps behind you. It's Runa, carrying 2 heavy buckets and wearing the expression of someone about to assign you a task whether you like it or not. She tells you it's time for midwinter offerings. You follow her out toward the forest path, past the fields now brown and brittle with frost. You carry bundles, bread, ale, a few bits of smoked meat, and some kind of lumpy carved wooden figurine you're told represents a harvest spirit named Olaf, or possibly just a chunk of wood with a face. You don't ask questions. Out in a small clearing there's a circle of stones. You help place the offerings carefully, murmuring the proper words. They are not elaborate, just thanks. Thanks for the harvest, for the fish, for surviving. You take a moment and add your own. Thanks for the warm boots, the non-possessed cow, and for not tripping during the feast dance. This is part of what kept Vikings going. Not just brawn, but belief. Ritual. Meaning. You weren't just surviving nature, you were negotiating with it. You return to the village with wind-chapped cheeks and a faint smell of pine in your cloak. As the sky darkens, the longhouse glows brighter, lamplight flickering behind the thick-hide curtains. You step inside and are immediately wrapped in the scent of stew and smoke. Someone has baked again. Someone always bakes when the cold sets in. It's how you fight frost, one cake at a time. You settle by the hearth and hear that a group is planning another journey. Not raiding, but exploration. The rumour is there's new land across the sea where grapes grow wild and the winters don't bite quite as hard. Some call it Vinland, some say it's a myth, but the boat is real, and so are the people boarding it. You ask if they need another oarsman. They say yes. That night you pack quietly. You've done this before, but this time it's different. Not a short trip, not a trade run, a leap. You roll your tunic carefully, wrap your sayax, tuck your new brooch into a pouch for luck. You whisper goodbyes to the longhouse walls and the carved beam above your bed. You even pat the lintel once, softly. Brynhildur watches you from her paddock. You swear she nods, or maybe it was a sneeze. At dawn you walk with the others toward the shore. The longship is waiting, drawn up on the frost-hardened sand. The sea stretches out silver and quiet, not yet churning with the moods of deep winter. You board, take your place among the oars, and nod to the rower beside you. He hands you a crust of bread. You hand him a dried apple. That's friendship, Viking style. The boat pushes off with a slow scrape and a gentle splash. The oars dip in unison. The wind catches the sail. The coastline begins to slide away behind you. Someone starts humming a rowing chant, low, simple, soothing. You join in. This is the other side of Viking life. The restlessness, the hunger to move, the belief that somewhere out there, beyond the mist, is something new, not always better, just different. And even if you never find it, the search itself feels like a kind of peace. The rhythm of the oars carries you forward. The sea breathes beneath you. The cold air bites, but you're ready for it. You have your wool-cooled cloak, your worn boots, and a half-baked prayer that this journey leads to something warmer than frost and fish stew. You don't know where you're going, but you know you belong on the way there. The rhythm of the sea becomes your new heartbeat. Day by day the coastline disappears, replaced by endless grey water and skies that shift between pale silver and bruised purple. The boat creaks like it's muttering to itself. The men row in silence or in song, depending on the wind. The sail snaps above your head like a lazy thunderclap. And you row, breathe, and wait. You're part of the boat now. The journey to Vinland, if it exists, is not swift. Days blend, meals of fish, more fish, and an occasional root vegetable someone forgot to remove from their bag. At night, you pull your cloak tight and sleep curled on the deck beneath stars that feel too close. The sea rocks you like a lullaby sung by a giant with sore arms. You're not afraid, not really. The Vikings were explorers after all. Everyone talks about raiding and pillaging, but they don't talk enough about the patience it took to stare at the sea for weeks on end without punching someone. You pass the time in quiet ways. You carve small runes into your oar, one for each day. You practice knot work. You listen to a man named Eric tell deeply suspicious stories about sea serpents who only eat left-handed rowers. You're right-handed, but still, you switch sides occasionally, just in case. One evening a gull lands on the mast. Everyone stares at it like it's a divine sign. It poops and leaves. The crew takes this as confirmation that land must be near. And one morning, it is. A dark green line on the horizon becomes a forest. Trees taller than your longhouse. Shoreline wild and jagged. You land with a thump and a cheer and wobbly legs. The beach is soft, the air is warmer. The ground smells like wet moss and strange berries. You are no longer in your world. You are in someone else's. The crew gets to work full fast. They erect a few shelters, light fires. One man, overexcited, tries to plant barley before anyone's unpacked the tools. He is quietly redirected. You explore. Just beyond the beach lies a forest thick with pine and red-stem bushes. You move slowly, axe in hand, not for violence, just for comfort. You pick your way between fallen logs, strange birdsong, and insects that seem genuinely confused by your existence. At one point, you find a clearing with a cluster of stones arranged in a loose circle. You sit there for a long time, not because of any vision or sign, but because it feels like someone else once did. You walk back toward the camp as the sun sets, red gold and vast. The crew is gathered around a fire. Someone is singing again. The song has changed. It's lower, slower, less about gods, more about home. Someone passes you a carved cup filled with something they're calling New World Ale, which tastes like berries, moss, and poor decisions. You drink it anyway, because this is the Viking way. Explore first, question the taste later. That night, you lie beneath the stars again, but these stars look different. The same constellations, yes, but they feel newer here, cleaner. You think about the people who might live in this land. You wonder if they've seen your ship, if they're watching now, if they too are lying under these stars wondering who you are. Historians still argue about how far the Vikings travelled, how long they stayed, what they did, whether they made friends or enemies or just really odd footprints. The sagas speak of Vinland, of grapes, of fights and frost and mystery, but no one really knows. What you know is that you were there. Even if the land never gets a name, even if no map holds your route. You stood in a forest where no one knew your face, and you breathed in air that hadn't yet heard your language. And when the crew finally agrees it's time to head back, you don't feel disappointed. You feel complete. Because for a Viking, the act of going was the reward. Not conquest, not plunder. Just the proof that the world was bigger than your own roof and that your feet were brave enough to leave it. The return journey is quieter, reflective. The rowing is slower, the conversation softer. You catch yourself humming one of the new songs someone wrote in Vinland. It has no chorus, just a string of notes that sound like pine trees and wet moss and distant birds. You reach the coast of home one foggy morning. Doesn't look different, but you do. You carry your pack back up the hill past the familiar paddocks and fences and crooked sheds. People wave. Some ask if you found grapes. Some ask if you brought treasure. You just smile and say, I brought stories. That night you sit by the fire and begin one. So there was this gull. You tell the gull story a lot. It's not dramatic, but it always gets a laugh. You act out the bird's arrival with a puffed chest and exaggerated strut. You reenact the moment of silence before the poop, the pause, the majesty, the betrayal. And then, of course, the pooping. People love that part. Children repeat it in the fields. One girl names a chicken after you. You pretend not to care, but secretly you're honoured. That chicken is fast. And just like that, you realise you've become one of the storytellers. You're not the old man with the longest beard, yet, but you've seen things. You've left and come back. You've eaten smoked fish in 3 regions and survived a night in a collapsing lean-to. You've earned your sagas, not with a sword, but with stubbornness, soup, and a sea axe used mostly for opening stubborn walnuts. So you tell them, slowly, thoughtfully. You pass on the tale of the woman who tricked a king with a riddle, the boy who fell in love with a bear, possibly metaphorical, possibly not. The time you tried to barter a wooden spoon for a bag of salt and accidentally ended up engaged. That one takes explaining, and people listen. Not because your voice is the loudest or your muscles the biggest, but because you're part of the thread now, woven into the long meandering tapestry that makes Viking life more than just cold mornings and boat splinters. One night by the fire, a girl asks you how to carve runes. You show her. Not just the letters, but the meanings, the little stories in each line. How algiz can mean protection, or elk, or please don't let me drop this pot again. You let her carve one herself. It's crooked. You tell her it's perfect. She grins. And it hits you. This is what the old warriors were talking about. The good kind of legacy. Not fame, not fortune. Just being remembered. A gesture. A carving. A chicken with your name. You go back to the river the next day, sit on your usual rock and watch the water slide by. A fish jumps. A bird scolds you. You nod at both. Then you pull out a knife and carve one more little mark into the flat stone by your feet. Nothing elaborate. Just a line and a curl. A symbol only you know. Not for others, just for you. And that's when you notice something. Someone else has started carving too. Tiny marks. Fresh. Someone's been here, telling their own quiet truths in stone. Maybe that girl. Maybe someone else who saw you sitting here day after day and thought, I want to be part of that too. You smile, tuck your knife away, and start walking back. The season's turning again. You can feel it in the wind. Winter's not far, but it's not here yet. There's still time to chop wood, brew ale, stitch another charm into your tunic. Time to laugh and fish and gently tease your friend about that one time they fell into a hole they swore wasn't there. Historians still argue what the Vikings really believed in. Did they think they'd go to Valhalla? Did they truly fear Ragnarok? Were they more spiritual, more superstitious, more practical? Maybe all of it. But you're beginning to believe in something else entirely. The daily greatness, enormous of small things. Helping a neighbour fix a fence, teaching someone how to salt fish, sharing a joke so well it becomes a song, being known not for the wars you fought, but for the soup you made on a stormy night that kept someone warm. That's Viking life too. At the end of the week, a trader arrives from another village bringing news, gossip, and a bag of questionable-looking apples. He mentions that a ship bound for the north is leaving soon. New places, new markets, new faces. You think about it! You could go, you might. Or maybe you'll stay a little longer. Brynhilda would miss you. The children want more stories. There's still one spot on your cloak that could use a third brooch. You don't need to decide now. You've earned your place here. Whether you stay or go, you've fed the fire, carved the stories, sung the songs, even the one about the spoon incident, which is now a fan favourite. You lie down that night under the thatched roof, the fire crackling low beside you, and you close your eyes. Not to the sound of waves or axes or thunder, but to the soft murmurs of a village still awake, still living, still telling stories. And in the quiet between breaths you think, yeah, it was kind of awesome being a Viking. It's late now. The fire in the longhouse is low, glowing like a quiet memory across the faces of those still lingering near it. Outside, the wind slips between the thatch and timber like a curious ghost, nosing at the edges of sleep. You sit wrapped in your cloak, hands tucked beneath it, listening to the faint clatter of someone washing out a pot and the soft thump of boots being kicked off near the door. Your eyes trace the ceiling beams now as familiar as the back of your own hand. You think about how it all started, not with conquest or battle, but with a cold morning and a half-frozen bowl of porridge. That feels like ages ago now. You've lived an entire Viking life. You've eaten stew cooked over peat fires, helped salt fish until your fingers wrinkled like dried apples, and sailed seas that didn't know your name until you left it behind in the foam. You danced at feasts until your legs gave out. You carved stories into wood and stone. You laughed at chickens, wore wool that itched gloriously, and named a cow who never once thanked you. And through it all you belonged. That's the part no one tells you about. The Vikings weren't just warriors or explorers, they were neighbours, weavers, parents, friends. They lived full, tangled, loud, affectionate lives with blistered hands and sore backs and inside jokes that made it into sagas, disguised as heroism. They had laws and they argued about them. They had farms and goats that defied physics. They had gods and beliefs that made life make a little more sense on the days it tried to come undone. And they had each other. You think about Runa's smirk when you tried to help churn butter and drop the paddle. You think about Solveig and her loom. Astrid with her garden that looked like a small war zone but somehow fed 5 families, and that kid who swore he could see Thor in the clouds and now insists Odin lives in his shoe. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you found yourself shaping a life. Not in grand acts, but in all the tiny ones. Stirring a pot, fixing a fence, letting a story become someone else's favourite. There's comfort in that. A different kind of strength. Historians still argue what made Viking society endure. Was it trade, technology, adaptability? Yes and no. Maybe it was simply this. They made room for song, for the people to leave and come back, for goats to steal bread and be forgiven, for you to carve your spiral above the door and let it mean something. The wind outside picks up, the embers shift. You pull your cloak tighter and lie down on your straw bed, listening to the creak of the longhouse as it settles in for the night. You don't dream of dragons or battles. You dream of the forest in spring, of hot bread on cold mornings, of laughter shared over something that probably wasn't even funny. You dream of a boat you built with your own hands and the sound of oars cutting through still water. And in that dream, you are warm, safe, whole, because you lived a life, a Viking life, and it was kind of awesome. So now, as the longhouse fades into quiet and your eyes begin to close, let the story drift gently behind you. No more axes to swing, no sails to raise, just the soft crackle of a fading fire, the weight of wool across your shoulders, and the sense that you've made it home. You've walked through a Viking day, and more than that, a Viking life. You've felt the cold of northern mornings, the ache of honest work, the warmth of feasts and laughter. You've earned every callous and every smile. Let it all grow softer now. The stories, the sea, even the sky. Let your breaths slow with the rhythm of distant oars. Let your thoughts ripple like mist over calm water. There's nothing to fix, nothing to do, nothing to prove. You've sung the sagas, shared the bread, danced with goats, and returned from distant shores. You've been the wanderer and the one who stayed, the listener, the laugher, the quiet soul by the fire. So breathe and rest. And if the wind calls to you again, someday you'll know how to answer. But for now, the longhouse is warm, your bed is soft, and the stars have tucked themselves in just for you. Close your eyes, Viking. The journey is done.